dear, get my daughter in the frame. Yes, it was. Let's get on the neat bell.
Do I need to turn it on? Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Wall Garden here at Llanfrechfa Grange. I'm Jan Smith, and I'm the chair of the charity that has taken on the challenge of renovating this old Victorian wall garden to what you see today and more planned for the future. The order of play for this afternoon is to celebrate this very special day in the history of this garden and to enjoy just wandering around and some cake and coffee and whatever else you fancy off of the refreshment stand later. We have already been serenaded by the U3A choir from Newport, and they will be singing throughout the afternoon. They are collecting for Ukraine, so if you do feel you want to generate to give something to that, then please do collect with the choir. We've also going to have a plant sale, and those of you who came into the gate in front of me will have seen all the plants in our nursery, and that will be open from just after 3 o'clock. Cash only, I'm afraid. We haven't migrated to cards yet, but do enjoy and come and see what we have on offer. Okay, so order of play is myself, and I've already been threatened that I've got to shut up after about 15 minutes, so I'll try and be even briefer than that if I can. I'm Jan Smith. I'd like to introduce you to some of my fellow trustees. We have Sundry. I'm away, Sundry, so know who you are. Sundry is our volunteer secretary. Binker, who is our member secretary, and Angela, who is our secretary. We have 2 other trustees, Christopher, who is our accountant, and Chris isn't with us today because he deemed it far more important to go on his stag weekend. So our trustee Sarah Lee join. But I'm pleased to say his parents and his grandmother are here today with us. And our sixth and final trustee is Jane. Jane is a consultant in public health medicine who's recently retired after returning from retirement to be part of the public health response to the COVID pandemic. And Jane is on a very much well-earned holiday the next 2 weeks, and she's actually avoided being here behind this mic. No. She'll be enjoying herself, I've no doubt. And then last but not least, around the garden are our volunteers, the most important people for creating this incredible space. So folks, volunteers, guys with badges, can you all give us a wave, please? Please. These are the people that have made it all possible with their energy and everything they've put into creating this garden, from their skills, their knowledge and their time and their gifts as well. So thank you everybody, and I'm going to start with that thanks because I might be shut up by my friends back here before I get to the end of my presentation. Now before I go on, can I just ask, can the choir hear me? Okay. So what I would like to do is just tell a brief story of these 4 walls and how important they are to us and how important they can be to people in the future. This garden, we think, was built at the same time as the Manor House, the old Grange house, which was started in 1948. So we're pretty sure the garden is somewhere around 170, 175 years old. It will in that time have witnessed many things, not least there have been 2 world wars. I'll take you through a whistle-stop journey, if I may, to the history of it, who did what here, important points in its history. So it was in private ownership from 1848 until 1933, and there were 5 families lived here in that time. By far, the family that was here the longest were the Mitchells, and the Mitchells bought it in 1860 until they died in the early 1900s. The Mitchells were great friends of the community, as well as being obviously the owners of the manor, and they supported the renovation, regeneration of Llanfrechfa Church. And in the messages that we've read, or the notes that we read around Llanfrechfa Church, is reference to stones from the stables that were demolished as part of that renovation of the church, coming into this garden to form some of its walls. And if you look at the style of the walls, there are changes that reflect different years when different things were done here. The garden itself would have provided fruit, vegetables and flowers for the families in the house and for their visitors, and I think probably also for the community. As I said, it changed hands in 1933, and at that time it fell into the ownership of a company called the Llanfrechfa Development Company. They, we believe, either built or sold plots of land off down past the main road between here and the A442 for building of homes. So the beginning, effectively, of Llanfrechfa Lower. The house fell empty. So from 1933 until just before the war, the house wasn't occupied. But the garden was still managed. Not just this garden, but the grounds as well. And we've learned from one person who found us here just how much went on beyond these walls. There were massive greenhouses and orchards, again providing more fruit and flowers for the families and the homes. That person was Peter Kelly. We found Peter, or rather Peter found us, through an article in the Argus when we first started renovating the garden, and Peter became a very frequent visitor. The reason he came here was he was the son of a head gardener who took up post here in the 1920s. And Peter was actually born in the gardener's cottage just down the road. He told us many, many stories about this garden and how it was used, what his father did, what he grew, the trees around the walls, and called it his childhood playground. One of his stories was he used to run around the walls and pick different pieces of fruit as he did, until his father said, "That's okay, Peter, just carry on." And then the novelty wore off. So Peter said, no longer with us, but was a great friend for a good many years. We think the gardens were maintained because it kept the house alive, and we do know that the produce at that time was sold to a fruiterer in Newport. So winding forward, the house fell into public ownership at around the beginning of the war. Initially it was used as a maternity hospital for mothers moved out of blitz areas of Birmingham and London. So we've been contacted by several people who were born here but have never come back. So they've searched their own history, found they were born at Llanfrechfa Grange, followed it through our website and sent us little cameos of where they are now and what they're doing. And one day we'll get organised and publish it all. So stories come in now and again. During the war, the state was used as a maternity hospital. That continued beyond the war as a maternity hospital for the local population until maternity services moved to Pontypool. The garden, we believe, continued to feed the house and its patients. So it played a very important role in the function of the whole of the Llanfrechfa Grange. The development company then disappeared. The hospital became, in the 1950s, a learning disabilities and mental health hospital. And again, the garden had an important role. They employed gardeners. The gardeners were encouraged to help teach some of the residents here in horticultural skills. And in fact, I believe they were actually given a lead payment for doing that. Yes, there would have been. Yeah, therapeutic horticulture. So there was lots of activity here, supervised by the professional gardeners who managed the gardens, but bringing in the clients who lived on the site. Towards the end of the last century, around the 1990s, when care in the community was being exercised, a lot of the residents here were moved gradually out into community homes. And the last residence, we now have just 10 beds on the site, compared to well over 500 in its heyday in the middle 19th century. When that coincided with a change in management of the NHS and the reorganisation of the NHS, and at that time all the groundwork for the hospitals, including this garden, were contracted out. And it was deemed that this garden no longer had any value. It was closed down. So those of us that worked on the site at the time just saw the gates closed and nothing happened in here other than it was used for storage of some equipment. And that went on for a few years and then that was gone. So that was around 1999. So wind forward now to 2015, 2014, 2013 I suppose now, yeah. 2013, when we were planning the wonderful Grange University Hospital behind you, there was a topography map done of the whole site, and it is a very big site. So the big map was presented to several groups across the health board, with lots of information about buildings, services, roads, all across the site. And in the middle was this little irregular rectangle with the words "unable to survey" written in it, and it was the garden. And I've been struggling to find out exactly where the genesis came from for the idea of turning this into a community garden. But I think some of the blame sits with Angela, some of it was Jill, and some of it was Jane, who's not here today, and certainly some of it was Judith Paget, the chief exec, recent chief executive of the site. To cut a long story short, there were many discussions, many debates, and one of the things that was mooted was that it should be just a thoroughfare between the old and the new, and would be very simply landscaped with some trees and some benches and some grass. Other people had a much more ambitious idea that we could turn it into a community garden that would draw the community in and provide a resource for not just those that came in, but for visitors, for patients, and importantly for staff in the new hospital. And it's starting to realise that now, just starting to realise that ambition. Right. Oh, I don't have to miss that one. So, to cut a long story short, we went from being an exploratory group to a steering group to a group that was reporting to the project board for the new hospital, because we were very much in the curtilage of the build, to a community group which then became a registered charity in 1917. While the build was ongoing with the hospital, we had their fences around us. But part of that, which has saved us a phenomenal amount of money and we're indebted to the development, was the restoration of the walls. So the walls were all surveyed, and we had stonemasons here for some time, taking down the weak points, rebuilding them and recapping them, so we know the walls are really sound. And they worked alongside us, which was great. We had an internal fence, so we were inside and they were between the fence and the walls. Then, I can't remember the year when it was handed over to us. It was probably 2018, 2019, when the fences came down. Yeah. And we were a little more free to carry on with what we were doing. During that time, we've been out to consultations of what should the garden be used for, what should it look like. Lots of community input into that, and the final design was approved by the local authority because we are a listed building and we were attached to the hospital. We also drew in more volunteers. And those volunteers brought skills of building, of planting, of sheer enthusiasm, put up polytunnels, sheds, a huge amount of expertise in those groups. And we have grown from a handful of 3 or 4 volunteers to 40 plus now active in managing this garden. And I think that's just testament to how special these 4 walls are. COVID came along. And that changed everything. We were, up until then, running a therapeutic horticulture programme for youngsters on the autistic spectrum, supported by Growing Space, a fellow charity. When COVID happened and we lost our tutor from Growing Space, and so had to close the programme down. But we had then, at that point, been running predominantly on a Monday, with somebody coming in days in between to water, but most of the activity was on Monday. COVID meant we couldn't all be here together, so we developed a rota and now have people here every day. So actually did us a bit of a favour in a way, because it shared the responsibility of watering, but also brought in more people who wanted somewhere to go when they couldn't go anywhere else. And some of our volunteers are vulnerable, and the only thing they do is come here. And some of them are just starting to wander out elsewhere, but the garden has been incredibly important, certainly for me and certainly for many of our volunteers, as somewhere to be within a community during the last 2 years. That's led us to where we are today. Private gardening hospital ownership, but today we're going to be throwing the gates open and saying anybody can come in when we're here, when the volunteers are on site. These 2 gates will be open. Please come, use the garden, enjoy it, and explore it, and talk to the volunteers about what we've done here. So it's a really important day in its history, a really, really important day in its history. 170 years on from its initial building by those Victorian folk in the past. So I'm not going to say any more than that, all right? Right. But it's now my pleasure to introduce our next two speakers. First of all, Dr. Joe Richardson, who is a Deputy Chief Medical Officer in the Welsh Government, but in a past life was very much part of this organisation, the Health Board, and its predecessor organisation. So Jill knows us very well, and she has very kindly stepped in for Judith Paget, so she'll explain why she's not here in a moment. Jill, would you like to come forward?
Thank you very much. As with any special occasion, there's some telegrams, and I have a few messages to read out. The first one is from Dr. Andrew Goodall. As you know, he was just recently moved on from being Chief Exec of the NHS in Wales to becoming the Permanent Secretary in the Welsh Government. And he has sent a message. He said, "I'm delighted to see this innovation finally come fully to life, not least with all the hard work of all the volunteers. It will add greatly to the environment for staff, patients and the community. It will always act as a personal reminder to me of my own time working for Llanfrechfa University Health Board, of which I have very good memories. The team have all my best wishes for their launch, and I will find an opportunity to call in and see their efforts at some point in the future." And then, as Jan said, Judith is very disappointed not to be here today. I'll read out what she said. As you know, Judith was Chief Exec of the Llanfrechfa University Health Board for most of the Garden's evolution, and then has moved to replace Andrew, in fact, as Chief Exec of the NHS in Wales. She says, "I'm so disappointed that I can't be with you today. I was very much looking forward to visiting the garden again, but COVID-19 had other ideas. I have, of course, visited the garden on many occasions over the last few years and watched its transformation with huge pride. I can recall the very first conversations we had about the possibility of renovating the garden space as part of the plans for the new hospital. It could provide an opportunity to link the history of the former hospital to the new, provide an opportunity for the local community to get involved in the Health Board's plans for the new hospital, and also provide fantastic green space for staff, patients and visitors. This wonderful garden is the result of careful research and planning, inspiring design and careful delivery by a group of the most committed volunteers. It is truly amazing in every way. Thank you to everyone who has made this possible. Thank you for your vision, commitment and incredibly hard work through rain and shine and of course COVID disruption. Enjoy the afternoon, and I will look out for the photos on social media and be back for a visit soon. Best wishes to you all, Judith." So I'm very sad that Judith can't be with us. I can give that to David. My own memories of this garden are that I was working in that building over there. We would occasionally come for lunch in the canteen, which is where the metal building is now, and we would pass this door to what looked like a secret world, and occasionally we would try and look through, and I was going past with Jane Lazel one day, and we looked through and we just said to ourselves, what if that garden could come back to life? And I'm glad to say that thanks to Jane and Jan and all the trustees and volunteers, it has come to life in the most amazing way, and so many have given so generously as well, from local businesses and the community, and it's so wonderful that they're here today. So thank you for bringing to life what was just in imagination. And lastly, I've got another telegram. This is from the past actually, and this is from an Iron Bevan himself. And he said, "We could manage to survive without money changers and stockbrokers. We should find it harder to do without miners, steelworkers, and those who cultivate the land." Thank you for cultivating this garden.
Thank you, Jill. I'm sorry, one thing I did leave out of my bit was the thanks to the number of businesses and local organisations that have supported us. Some are here today. We've asked for help where we couldn't do things ourselves, where we needed heavy machinery to dig big holes and the like. Some of the infrastructure here is quite amazing. So finally, I'd like to introduce Dr. David Hepburn. David is a consultant anaesthetist intensivist in intensive care here at the Grange University Hospital, and he's just come back from a holiday for some kind of show. After 2 years of being really at the sharp end of the COVID pandemic. Some of you may have seen David in social media and on TV, but the reality is this man has worked alongside his colleagues incredibly hard in helping people through some of the most traumatic events in their lives. So we felt it was fitting that David should come and cut the ribbon for us today as we open these lovely walls to anybody and everybody, but particularly the staff in the hospital. David.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's a real honour to all of us in intensive care to be asked to do this by Jan and the trustees. I've got my suit on, you don't often see me in a suit, so it's an important occasion. I think the first thing I should say is to the volunteers, what a fantastic job you've done. I mean, it's absolutely astonishing. And what a great legacy. And you know, there's a lot being written about the therapeutic power of horticulture and of nature and of gardening. And I think this would be a fantastic space for both the staff to escape to and for the patients, if you can bring them down here and spend some time. And also people who've got family in here in the hospital. Visiting is still not what it could be, and actually there is a bit of waiting around involved. So for people to be able to come here and have some quiet reflection is absolutely fantastic. So really, thank you so much. You've done it's absolutely brilliant, and I know how important the garden has been to the local community during what have been, I think, for pretty much all of us, 2 quite difficult years. By rights, you shouldn't know who I am really, and I certainly shouldn't have been on the news. But COVID became the only news in town, and I know that this has been a lifeline, being able to come in and tend to the garden for the volunteers during a time when a lot of people in the community were very isolated. It's a new hospital. Obviously, we are here to serve our local community, and our local community, unfortunately, due to a lot of historic things, was hit very, very hard by the COVID pandemic, a lot earlier and a lot harder than a lot of places. And we've all seen some tragic stories, but we've also seen some fantastic ones of recovery, and that's really a legacy to everyone who worked very hard to get people back to their families and back to their normal lives again. So I'll stop rattling on, but without further ado, I'll declare the garden open, if I can. Thank you very much.
We are going to also open the gates, which we couldn't really get behind, could we, this afternoon. Thank you, David, and thank you, Gillian. Thank you, fellow trustees. So thank you, everybody, for staying with us, and thank you again to the choir for singing. You can start up again whenever you're ready. Refreshments are served down near the shed. Please help yourself. I'll go and be served, actually. We have plenty of people serving. But more importantly, do wander, enjoy the garden, and if somebody's got a badge on, they should know where they are and what they're talking about in that patch of the garden. So please feel free to ask questions. And again, thank you, everybody, for being a part of today. Thank you so much.
So that's all the official speeches done, and now the Llanfrechfa walled garden is now open to the public. You can see just those gates there is where it points out to the University Hospital, and then straight through there is to where the Grange, Llanfrechfa Grange, currently is. But yeah, when the volunteers are here, the gardens are open for anyone in the area to come and enjoy. If you're visiting friends, family, relatives, whoever's unfortunately staying in the hospital, you can obviously take a break and head over. Say, look, we're just going to go a quick stroll around, because the cameras there with the speeches, we obviously focused a lot on what they were saying. Yeah, these are the gardens here. And there's a choir singing. Let's have a look at that. There'll be more information on Come My Life probably tomorrow about the gardens, the opening, the website, and all those sort of things you'll need to know. But once we get over here, you'll be able to see where we are. You can just see the University Grange Hospital peeking out over the top of the wall, the four walls of the walled garden. Good name for it. It's another one of the entrances, but I think this one's usually closed. I believe the choir here is a local U3A choir. That's right. Yeah, do we? Cheers. Thank you. So yeah, look, I've come on live tomorrow. My daughter's birthday coming up. Got a few things to sort out, and you'll see more information on the gardens. We came in last year where they were not in the middle. They were doing really well towards bringing it to this stage. But today is the official opening of the Llanfrechfa walled garden. Scroll back to the video and you'll see trustees, the chair, all talk about the gardens, how they brought it back to the estate. Enjoy the rest of your sunny Saturdays.